I'm actually amazed that anyone came this morning. The past few days, you have heard me address subjects as varied as greed and materialism, human insecurity and the search for relevance, Jesus as Jew versus Jesus as founder of Christianity, a panel conversation about the future of Anglo Jewry, or that's at least what it became, and even kosher sex. The common denominator behind all these disparate things, for me, is my deep-seated belief that we, the Jewish community, should be bringing about a global revolution of Jewish values. That we should finally live out our biblical mandate, which is to be a light unto the nations. To be a community not known for our business prowess or our financial acumen, which is nice, of course, but to be known primarily for the wisdom that we have to impart about how to master life. They say that there's a difference between the wise man and the clever man. The clever man can extricate himself from situations into which the wise man would never have gotten himself into in the first place. Our world is not wise, it is clever. It's very clever. If someone were to be transported from the Middle Ages and see all the technology that surrounds us, or even the technology that's included in a single iPhone, they would be mesmerized at how clever we are. But if they were also to witness the littered landscape of broken lives, whether it's extreme things of substance abuse or more moderate things of people who just can't fall in love and get married, or people who've gotten married but don't know how to stay married, or people who do know how to stay married but they don't know how to stay married in love, or people who don't know how to inspire their children to make the right choices, or people who spend 3 hours in front of a television every night. They would be amazed at how good we are at mastering the world outside us and how poor we are at mastering the world inside us. Judaism is a highly complex system of ideas affording a mastery of life. Today, I've written one of my books is called Renewal. It's the 7 Universal Laws, 7 Universal Jewish Values applicable to all people in all times, which are counterintuitive, which go against the grain of what we even call Judeo-Christian values. These are unhyphenated values. What they all have in common is that they bring about a certain mastery of life. I'm going to speak about some of them, and then I want to begin to draw conclusions since this is my last session. Conclusions that pertain to world Jewry in general and Anglo Jewry in particular. We're not going to have time for 7. We may have time for 3. Let's begin with the most important of all. At the heart of Western living is a profound question. At the heart of Western living is a profound conundrum. The question is, how can a culture and a civilization you guys late because you touched that thing at breakfast and you like couldn't move yourselves from the table or something? And you were, yeah, I had the same experience. It's okay. Everybody looks so awake today. That's the good thing. At the heart of Western civilization is a question. How is it that a society that has developed such a high standard of living, that the wealthiest countries in the world are simultaneously the most depressed as well? The greatest malady affecting Western civilization is depression. Depression is becoming an almost untreatable phenomenon. 1 out of 3 people in Western countries report unhappiness and symptoms of depression. In the United States, as I said, day one out of 3 women is on an antidepressant. Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, these are the miracle drugs of our generation. But even for those of us who aren't depressed, we still struggle with feelings at times of low self-esteem, an absence of purposefulness. We lack belief in ourselves. Where is this coming from? How could you have such wealth on the one hand and such an absence of happiness on the other? When Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, by which he severed the 13 colonies from the British Empire, he said that one of the reasons this country is coming into being is the pursuit of happiness. The United States is an immensely successful nation, thank God, and I'm proud to be an American. But by that criteria alone, it has yet to succeed, because happiness has yet to really accrue. But the same thing is true, of course, for people in the mother country, here in Britain. What is making us so unhappy? It begins by rejecting the first of all universal Jewish values, which pertains to all humanity, but which has been substituted instead for a Christian value. The greatest difference between Christianity on the one hand, and we live in a Christian world, and Judaism on the other, is the belief in perfection versus struggle. The essence of Christianity is a belief in perfection. The very cornerstone of Christianity is that Jesus was divine. Any insinuation that he had any human foibles, that he was ever tempted by, say, a woman like Mary Magdalene, as Scorsese portrayed in his film Last Temptation of Christ, thank you, would be seen as blasphemy, because Jesus is perfect. He voluntarily lays his life down and submits to the cruelty and barbarity of Rome in order to bring about salvation for the souls of mankind. But Judaism does not have a single perfect person in the entire Torah. Indeed, as we come to the end of the book of Genesis, next week, the entire first book of the Torah has been a celebration of human shortcoming. Abraham fails with his son Ishmael and is heavily criticized for his treatment of him. Isaac fails with Esau raising a highly unworthy son. Jacob is forced to resort to deception in order to outmaneuver his brother so he doesn't gain tremendous power through the firstborn blessing. Jacob favors a child, creating limitless dysfunction in his own family. My gosh, even on Jerry Springer you don't have... Next we have 10 brothers who try to kill their youngest brother. But in a rare moment of love and compassion, they decide to merely sell him into slavery. This week's Torah reading by Yigash is one of the most moving of the year, the reconciliation. Joseph and his brothers. I remember when I was in Israel as a student in Jerusalem, I was told by my aunt and uncle who lived in the Negev that there was a boy who was hiking and he fell at the age of 12 and he almost died. He was in a coma for 6 months. His parents were utterly secular, atheists, but they decided, because he survived, to make him a bar mitzvah. But no one in their yeshiva knew how to do a bar mitzvah, and they asked me to come down from my yeshiva to do it. So it was this parsha. So I went down there with a colleague of mine who today runs a large yeshiva for returnees to Judaism in Jerusalem. And the father of the boy asked if he could read this section, because he can read Hebrew. And as he reads the Torah, and how Joseph begins to cry and reveals himself to his brother, the father just begins to break down. And he's hyperventilating, he can't even speak. And then he interrupts the middle of the aliyah. We were just happy to get him to put on a yarmulke. And he says that this is me and my son. This reconciliation. This being brought back to someone you lost. This is me and my son. I cannot believe that this is a mitzvah parsha. That reconciliation was necessitated by a deeply troubled family who had to find healing amidst tremendous pain. None of this could accord with a Christian retelling. The idea that we have such flawed heroes in the Torah is one of the reasons that people dislike Judaism. The world hates flaws, and it loves false models of perfection. They airbrush even beautiful women on the covers of magazines. Even politicians who cheat on their wives, who have drinking problems, they do everything to portray an air of invincibility and infallibility. Perfection as a value has won out. When I was a boy, growing up in the United States, they told me that George Washington was so perfect that when he was a little boy and he chopped down a cherry tree, and his father asked him about it, he could not tell a lie. Little old George could not tell a lie. So he admitted, confessed to the chopping of this cherry tree, even though it got into a lot of trouble. We were then taught that our greatest president, Abraham Lincoln, was so honest that once when he was overpaid a single penny by a storekeeper, he trekked the Sahara. He built a little space capsule and he launched himself to planet Neptune to pay it back because honest Abe would never be overpaid, would never allow himself to be overpaid even by a penny, which is why his visage is on our penny till today. And it's the only thing that's holding on to the penny. Most Americans want to get rid of the penny. But they so cherish the memory of Lincoln and that story that we still have our pennies. I was told that Martin Luther King, arguably the greatest American of the 20th century, was a perfect saint who martyred his life so that America could be more whole, so that it could stop being a nation of contradiction, where soldiers were liberating Jews from Bergen-Belsen and Mauthausen and Dachau during the Second World War, but at the very same time, a little black child kicking a soccer ball in Montgomery, Alabama, couldn't drink water from a fountain because of the color of his skin. It turned out, by the way, that none of these stories were true. It turned out that George Washington was deeply flawed. It turned out that George Washington was such a social climber that he sought out the richest widow in all of Virginia, whose name was Martha Custis. She would later be Martha Washington because he wanted money and status. He was still a loving husband, but he was a loving husband to a very wealthy woman. It turned out that Abraham Lincoln, far from perfect, was one of the most depressed Americans ever recorded in history. So depressed that his friends used to hide knives and sharp objects from him for fear that he would harm himself. Through much of the Civil War, he was gripped by a deep, dark depression that he had to fight every single night. It turns out that Martin Luther King, who rescued America from the sin of its own self-hatred, its bigotry and its racism, even the last night of his life, April 3rd, 1968, he spent with a woman other than his wife. And how did we react to hearing all these stories of great men who were so flawed? We began to identify with them. We began to relate to them. You mean that Martin Luther King was actually human? You mean he was actually afraid of Bull Connor's dogs in the South? You mean he actually watched the children being hosed through these marches, and he was filled with trepidation that he had to wrestle with and overcome? You mean he was like me, and I should emulate that example of greatness because he was all too human as well? When we started hearing about the flaws of our patriarchs, they started to become interesting. As a kid, I don't remember reading any books about the Founding Fathers. I couldn't care less. They were marble men, statues. But it was only when Joseph Ellis, I'll never forget this, when I was in my second year at Oxford, as rabbi there, I was there from 88 to 99, Joseph Ellis published a book called American Sphinx. I remember every Friday night coming home after these large dinners with our students at Oxford and reading this book till 3, 4 in the morning. The first honest book about an American founding father, that Thomas Jefferson owned 150 slaves. He didn't even release them after he died because he was so in debt that they were the only property he had left. And he left his children so much debt. And he had a sexual relationship with one of his slaves named Sally Hemings, with whom she bore him 6 children. Was it consensual? Well, he owned her. Arguably not. And he became a greater man through these horrible imperfections because it meant that all the good he did was not natural. He had to fight for it. It took exertion. Why is the royal family in England so troubled? And in all the years I lived here, just one scandal after another, humiliating scandals. So bad that you wondered how they showed themselves in public the next day. And the reason is, they're just normal people trying to go about their lives. But they're cast in an air of infallibility. The Queen has to be a statue and an icon. And as anyone placed into that kind of divine situation is bound to live unnaturally and to finally be exposed. And it's not healthy. Perfection is never a value we should have embraced. You know what perfect people are? They are a bore. Perfect people are predictable and monotonous. Don't believe me? Any of the women here, try dating a perfect man. I counsel wives all the time whose husbands are perfect. You know what they do? They criticize their wives constantly. They find fault with everything they do. Worse, they inflict upon their wives the greatest pain imaginable in any relationship. Because the greatest pain in any relationship is to feel that you are loved, but you are not needed. A perfect man needs no one. And there is nothing more painful than to feel superfluous, than to feel extraneous. That is why, when the Torah tells us that the very first emotion experienced by the very first man, Adam, Lo tov heyosa adam levado, it is not good for man to be alone. This is what made Adam finally capable of a relationship. That he experienced his own loneliness. He found his own incompletion. He found there were things about him that needed fixing, that needed fulfillment. And in that, he made Eve feel essential. No one wants to be loved. If you wanted to be loved, you would never leave your parents. You would live at home forever. Your parents will never abandon you. But we want to be necessary. So we go to a stranger who has similar needs. And we build a life as they place us at the center of their existence. We become an orb. We become a light around which their planet revolves. And in so doing, we begin to find ourselves. And we begin to find our essential nature. You don't believe me that perfection is monotonous and boring? Look at the electoral problems being experienced currently by Barack Obama. No one can quite understand what is it about Obama that he can't connect with the American people anymore. 4 years ago, this man was giving speeches that were electrifying our nation. 80, 100 million people were watching his speeches. The Super Bowl gets numbers like that once a year. It had never happened before. When he first became president, his press conferences were getting 60 million viewers. You don't want to know how much it's changed? And this is not a political statement. When he needed to give a speech in September to save his presidency with a brand new jobs bill, and he called for a joint session of Congress, amazingly, he broke with history and tradition and gave the speech at 7 p.m. instead of prime time, 9 p.m., because that night there was a football game. And he was afraid to compete with a football game. He spoke at 7 p.m. What happened? Why can't he relate? You can like his politics, you can despise his politics. He's so perfect. And that's what all the commentators are saying. He's so aloof and he can't relate to people. And they're begging him, show some emotion. They're begging him, screw up a speech. They stopped watching his speeches because he reads from teleprompters and they're too perfect. People are pining for the twisted syntax of George W. Bush. They're pining for the hormonal primordial soup that is Bill Clinton. They're waiting for one guy to bite his lip again and feel their pain. Because people relate to people. So every time a Christian asks, what would Jesus do? They automatically compare themselves to a standard of perfection. And every time the Queen, or some supermodel, or some great businessman is portrayed in the media, because they've all embraced this model of perfection, as doing everything always right. No matter what they eat, they're always there. No matter what they invest in, they're always making money. Then you know what happens? We look at ourselves by comparison, and we feel bad about who we are. Who the hell can compare with that? You go to see a movie, sure it's entertaining, but you have just seen 30 or 40 carefully selected models of perfection who spend maybe 5-6 hours a day cultivating their body, their image. And as you walk away, you pay homage to these models of perfection. Then you start talking about them. Then, at the dinner table, you're not even talking to your kids about their day in school. You're not talking to your wife about what she did at home that day. You're talking about a movie you saw. You're worshiping at the altar of perfection. You're then reading magazines about these people so you can pay them further worship, because as models of perfection, you are oh so flawed that all you can do is bask in their light and obsess over them. This culture of celebrity worship that actually is worse in Britain than anywhere else, because in America it's pretty bad, but we don't have a Victoria Beckham and this is embarrassing. It's embarrassing. And the whole point is to try to prove they're not perfect. You talk about them day and night, I think he may have had an affair. Really? You don't think that he's a paragon of nobility and virtue? Surprise, surprise. You mean he's just human? This is all embarrassing. And it all flows from this broken value of perfection. Islam copies it with now insisting against its own principles on the perfection of the Prophet. Officially, the Prophet's not divine. Officially, Muhammad is human, and if you even dare say he's divine, you have blasphemed. In fact, Islam is even pure monotheism than Judaism. In Judaism, we don't allow sculpture because it might be worship, but we do allow two-dimensional images. In Islam, not even that's allowed. There are no portraits of people. That's why Islamic art is usually about the symbols. Arabic symbols are made into art forms because they don't make art forms out of people. And yet, go and try to criticize the Prophet today. Do a caricature in a newspaper of the Prophet. Your city will burn to the ground within hours, because even Islam is leaving its dramatic insistence on human fallibility and now embracing the perfection of the Prophet. Let alone the Buddha is perfect. Everybody's perfect. There is only one religion on earth that celebrates not perfection, but struggle. What does the word Judaism mean? What does Israel mean? To be a child of Israel. To be a child of Israel is to be a child of the struggle. Yisrael, he who struggles with God, he who wrestles with God. Kisarisa im Elokim v'imanoshim atucha. Your name used to be Jacob. You were the child of the heel. But now you have wrestled with an angel. And in wrestling with your human imperfections, with wrestling with your unhappiness and depression, with wrestling with your body images, with wrestling with paying your family's bills, by engaging in the fight, by being, as Teddy Roosevelt called it, the man in the arena, you have earned a new name, and it's greater than perfection. You are a man who wrestles and fights to do what's right, and sometimes you fall, but you pick yourself up, and when you do so, you achieve greatness. Because why is the struggling man more virtuous, more worthy than the perfect man? Because the perfect man fights for nothing. And he stands for nothing. It all comes easy to him. It's intuitive, it's automatic, it's instinctual. But the man who wrestles, the woman who struggles, those of us who eat out our kishkas just to raise good kids, and we feel disappointed at times, and we question our parenting skills, and our marriages are on the brink, and we haven't had sex in 6 months, which is becoming very common. In fact, you're lucky if you have it every 6 months. And you lost your job, and your boss put you down, but you somehow muster the dignity to walk through that door at home and not bring all of that bitterness into the house with you so that your kids don't get a jaundiced view of life that it sucks. You are a great man. You are a great woman because you fight for what's right. It comes with a struggle, and that means you have to choose it constantly. The person who struggles is by far not only more morally complex and so much more fascinating than the person who's perfect. My God. They give such joy and delight to God as well. The Tanya, the Bible of Chabad Hasidic thought says, quoting from the Zohar, Kadis kafya sitra achra istalak yekara de kuchabricha b'chol almin. Every time you are presented with a choice to do the wrong thing or the right thing, and we're presented with these choices 1,000 times a day, and you choose to do the right thing, you make God relevant every single time. You show that He has power over your life, enough to inspire you to choose the right thing. It's an incredible thing for it not to happen intuitively. There is a war going on. It's being waged. And the reason we're so unhappy is that we choose this model of depression and we beat ourselves up that we can't live up to it. When really, we should have rejected it from the first instance. I am not a Jew because I was born a Jew. Birth means next to nothing. If I were born in North Korea, I'd get the hell out as fast as I could. I am a Jew because the perfection of Christ has no appeal for me whatsoever. I am a Jew because the perfection of the prophet has no appeal for me. I am a Jew because I believe that human greatness is found in wrestling with the divine and wrestling with ourselves. And I embrace this struggle. And I will no longer beat myself up for not being perfect. And I will no longer compare myself to other models of perfection so that I am always found wanting. A few years ago, I married a couple, meaning I performed the wedding ceremony of a couple. This man was very romantic. He had dated his wife for 4 years. And he was someone who believed in small gestures. He was a very romantic man. The morning after the wedding, he calls me, early afternoon, and he's troubled, very troubled. He said to me, I have to speak to you right now. I said, I'm in a meeting. He said, well, you call me right back. I just got married. I leave my meeting. I said, what's wrong? Did something happen? He said, no. I said, you guys happy? He said, we're thrilled, but something terrible happened. I said, what happened? He said, I went to the shopping mall to buy a camera to take pictures of the Sheva Brachas for the next 7 days. And a very attractive woman served me, and I bought a camera from her. I said, yeah? And he said, I noticed how attractive she was, and I felt drawn to her. I said, okay. I said, you only bought a camera, right? He said, yeah, I bought a camera. But I felt very drawn to her. I said, I got to get back to my meeting. This is getting kind of weird. What's the crisis? He said, the crisis is that love is so imperfect. I always believed it was perfect. I was going to marry and never be attracted to another woman again. Women were going to become mannequins to me. There are some good-looking mannequins, by the way. Women were going to become like wood, statues. I have betrayed my heart, I have betrayed my wife, but love has betrayed me, and I'm devastated. I told him, take 2 aspirin, and I'll call you this evening. I actually decided to drive over and see him after the Sheva Brachas. And I sat with him and I looked at him and I said the following. I said, your mistake is to believe that you fall in love with a woman, choose her under the chuppah, and you never have to choose her again. But the nature of love is such that you have to choose your wife every single day. So you're going to go to work every day, and you're going to work with attractive, friendly, compelling colleagues. They're going to be women who are nice and friendly and funny, and you're going to laugh with them at the water cooler. Then you're going to get on the tube to go home, and you're going to see other attractive women. Then you're going to be walking down the street, other nice people, and you're going to see a woman walking right by you, dressed well, put together, fit, and you're going to notice that she's attractive. And you're going to walk right past her to choose your wife anew amid all those other possible choices. Because you don't get married just once under the chuppah. If you did, your marriage would grow stale. If you did, monotony and predictability would slowly undermine it like termites eroding the foundation of a building. But you will be forced to choose her anew, and that's why you have to look at things completely differently. The false model of perfection had destroyed his whole understanding of love. By the way, it's destroying politics. In the United States, our feeling is that we're not getting the best candidates these days to run for public office. And the reason? Because people are terrified to run. Everybody has something they did that they're ashamed of. Everybody. Everybody has things that they never want to come out. Because we're not perfect. And people are terrified that the media is just there to expose what a hypocrite you are, when in reality, the hypocrite is not the man who says X and does Y. That's not a hypocrite. If Bill Clinton says, I believe in love and marriage, and then cheats with Monica Lewinsky, believe it or not, he is not a hypocrite. He actually believes in love and marriage. He is a very inconsistent man. And he's a very contradictory man. He says something, but he cannot summon the discipline to follow it. That's true. But the hypocrite is someone who says something and doesn't believe it even as they say it. They're saying it for public consumption alone. So even our definition of hypocrisy is ruining our politics. We don't have the most inspiring figures. Today, if we had a Winston Churchill figure and we could expose what an alcoholic he was, that guy's running a war and he's sort of plastered a majority of the time, because all we're looking for is to expose human foibles. But it goes further. Again, we're looking at the difference between the Christian emphasis on perfection versus the Jewish emphasis on struggle. It goes further. Yisrael means he who wrestles even with God. The The biggest question of 20th century Judaism, and perhaps for the next 1,000 years, is where was God at Auschwitz? Where was God as he watched 15,000 Jews per day being incinerated, gassed, and their bodies burnt into smoldering ash? When I lived at Oxford, there was a well-known professor who I believe now is at the University of Birmingham, here in the UK, named Professor Jonathan Weber, for those of you who know him. He is the world's leading expert on the Auschwitz death camp site. And he took me with his wife, Connie, who's a dear friend of mine, to Krakow to see Auschwitz and the environs. Galicia. We walk out into this clearing, and it's summer, and I'm wearing sandals, and my feet are getting cut up by thorns and thistles. We keep on walking. I said, Jonathan, where are we going? He said, I'll show you. I said, it's uncomfortable. Why are we here? He said, I'll show you. We keep on walking. We suddenly come to a clearing in the middle of the woods. And there's this big tree. He said, we came to see this tree. What's special about a tree? He said, read the plaque. Here, 800 Jewish children from an orphanage were murdered. He said, do you know why they brought them here? He said, you see, the children, they told them to stand still. They cleared out an orphanage, I believe in the city of Tarnov, if I remember correctly. They told the kids, stand here in front of a pit so they could shoot them. But they were little kids. They thought it was a game, so they were running around. So the Nazi soldiers couldn't get a bead on them to shoot them. So they finally decided that they would twirl them around by their feet and crack their skulls against this tree. And 800 Jewish kids died just like that, he told me, right here on this tree. Now the God who watched this, where was he? What was he doing? Was he on a coffee break? He promised that we would be like the stars of the heavens. He said, B'ni B'chori Yisrael, my child, my firstborn is Israel. Firstborn for what? The first to be gassed? And we've had 1,000 books giving us 1,000 explanations as to where God was, justifying God's perfection. That God can do no good, can do no harm. Ein ra yored milamala, nothing bad comes from the heavens. And if anything, we are the ones who must have done something wrong. You see, German Jews were marrying out. They wanted to be more German than the Germans themselves. Why German Jewry had no Jewish pride? They wanted to forget they were part of God's people, so God reminded them. I've heard that explanation 1,000 times. A singularly stupid and ahistorical explanation for a simple reason, regardless of what you think about the theology. It all is undermined by the simple fact that German Jews, who supposedly were the sinful ones who deserved to be incinerated, they knew who Hitler was. Hitler comes to power in January 1933. By 1934, we have the Nuremberg race laws. By 1937, we have Kristallnacht. They were emigrating. They were trying to get the hell out. By the time the war came, by the time the Wannsee Conference of January 1942, 80% of German Jews were out. Do you know who Hitler incinerated in Auschwitz? The Hasidic Jews with Pius, who had no idea that he had done a pact with Stalin and was going to invade Poland on the 1st of September 1939, and then bombard Warsaw for 5 weeks, killing tens of thousands of religious Jews who inhabited Warsaw in the first few weeks of the war. 1 million Ger Hasidim died in the war. 1.5 million children died in the war. So the theory is, we were sinful, God punished us. Really? So the sinful Jews all lived, and all the religious ones who never wanted to be German, they're the ones who died? What a stupid theory. And rabbis who offer it embarrass themselves, let alone indict 6 million people that they never even met. How dare they? Or the other explanation, that we simply don't know the ways of God. God is inscrutable. Rabos machshavos b'levish. V'atzas Hashem yisakom. We human beings can surmise, but really, it's God's will that will be done. Something good came out of the Holocaust, we just can't see it. Israel came out of the Holocaust. As if the only way nations are born is when half their number are first gassed. But we can't know, because God has a plan that is beyond our understanding. This explanation is actually given summed up in a famous story. The story goes that 250, 300 odd years ago, every year on Simchas Torah, women who were barren would come to the Baal Shem Tov for a blessing for a child. They get in line. He'd bless them with a child. A woman comes, Baal Shem Tov ignores her. The next year she comes again. He gives a blessing to everyone except her. The third year she lunges at his feet. She holds on to his legs. And she says, I am not leaving until you give me a blessing for a child. The Baal Shem Tov tries to wrestle free. She won't let him. He looks at her and he says, very well. Next year you will be nursing a child. And he departed from his office without saying a word. True to his word, the next year she had a baby boy. And that boy was the love of her life. And she dressed him, clothed him, fed him, and then he contracted pneumonia at the age of 2 and he died. She came back with the body of the Baal Shem Tov and put the baby right in front of him and said, you knew, didn't you? That's why you wouldn't give me the blessing. The Baal Shem Tov said, yes, I knew. She said, it would have been better for you to have remained by your conviction, because the grief in my life, I will never overcome it. I pray to God every day that I die. The Baal Shem Tov said, this once, just this once, I will lift the curtain that separates the hidden worlds from the revealed worlds so that you will see the true story behind this soul. And with that, Baal Shem Tov said to her, do you remember about 50 years ago, there were the worst pogroms in Jewish history. The Khmelnytsky pogroms, 1648, 1649, the Tachvatat massacres. 250,000 Jews were killed. There were no machine guns back then. There were no gas chambers. You had to kill a Jew with a sword. It took a lot of time, a lot of effort. And the Cossacks marauded through the countryside, killing as many Jews as they could under Khmelnytsky. Well, they come to one little Jewish town, they kill everybody, then one of these Cossacks who has no children hears a baby crying. No one's looking, he takes the baby, adopts him. And for 2 years, this baby goes with his father everywhere until the Russian Tsar and the Polish king marshal their forces together, they defeat Khmelnytsky. They find a little boy who's circumcised, clearly he's Jewish, and they give him up for adoption to a Jewish family. The boy becomes part of this family, is loved, grows up to lead a virtuous life, has children, grandchildren of his own, and that soul, after 120 years, comes before the heavenly tribunal. And the heavenly tribunal says, you were a righteous man, you should go straight to Gan Eden. But the man, but one of the angels objects and says, the first 2 years of his life, forget it. We can't bring that kind of trauma into the Garden of Eden. This soul is tainted. It witnessed rape, murder, pillage. So they agree that the soul has to return to earth for 2 years, where it can be in a holy environment, after which it can go into heaven forever. And the Baal Shem Tov said, this was your son. Very moving story. Shows that what seems to be a tragedy really is not. Except that the story proves and means nothing. I'll tell you why. You mean God who is all-powerful, God who fills the infinite expanse of space? That same God can't cleanse a soul in some other manner without a mother sitting Shiva and mourning for the rest of her days? You mean the all-powerful God? You mean this is it? What does the story explain? Nothing. In the same way that God could have brought about the state of Israel at a cotton candy fair one day, as the European nations were all having a day at a carnival, and they said, you know what, let's be nice to the Jews. It didn't take a Holocaust. God is all-powerful. When I was a little boy, my mother took me to the dentist. I had a sweet tooth, and I had all these cavities. And the dentist pulls out a needle this big. And I said, what the heck's that? He said, we got to numb your tooth before we drill. And he shoves it into my head. And then there I was a year ago, all these years later, just 4 years later. Thank you. Glad to see you're still with me. And I go to the dentist, and he pulls out this giant needle. I said, what the heck is that? He said, we got to numb your tooth. I said, wait a second. They used to do this when I was a kid, before the internet. You haven't come up with anything? God can come up with a better way. So where was God at Auschwitz? How is it that we have stories, like this famous story told, of the city drunk, the Badchan, who runs into shul one day in Warsaw while the Jews are davening Shachris. Everyone has a tefillin in their talis. He says, Jews, stop davening now! The man's crazy, throw him out. I said stop davening now. And he wouldn't let the minyan continue. Until they said, what is bothering you? He said, you're davening so loudly, God will hear you. And he'll know there are still Jews left in Europe. And he'll come after us too. Where was God when all this happened? You see, when Jacob is told that your name shall be he who wrestles with God, that is the Jewish response to suffering. It's to hold God accountable and wrestle with him in the face of these tragedies. How could it have happened, O Lord? We don't want any explanation. We will never accept it. We won't write another book that allows you to be off the hook. We won't give another theodicy, another theological explanation that somehow justifies mass murder. You created an imperfect world, and we will make it better, with your help or without it. Isn't that what secular Jews said when they built the state of Israel? The Orthodox community often has lost this belief in wrestling with the divine. It was secular Jews who decided, we're tired of being slaughtered, we're going to build an army. We're going to build a land. We don't want anyone else's land. It'll be this big, but it will be ours. And it will be safe for a Jew to walk around for the most part, but we'll do our best. And the Orthodox said, we're going to wait for Hashem to send Mashiach. They thought that Judaism is about being the submissive man of the spirit, when in truth, Judaism is about being the rebellious man of faith. The man of faith is a man of rebellion. He rebels even against God himself. He is a man of defiance. What is God? When God says to Abraham, there's a city down the road named Sodom and Gomorrah, and they are roim achatoim l'Hashem, they are exceedingly wicked. And I'm going to pulverize them. What does Abraham say? Hashofet kol ha'aretz lo ya'aseh mishpat. He raises his fist to the heavens, raises a mighty cudgel, and he says, you, the judge of the entire earth, shall yourself be unjust? Can anyone here imagine talking to God that way? What would they do to an Orthodox rabbi that said that today? When Moses is told by God, Lech rei, get off Mount Sinai, because the nation that you brought out of Egypt have sinned, so they have left the righteous path. They have made for themselves a golden calf. Now let me be Moses. And I will devour them in an instant. And I will make you into a mightier, a greater nation than even they. And then in the greatest defense of human life ever recorded in any apocalyptic literature, Moses begins his defense slowly and deliberately, rising to a crescendo. And that when we read this, every fast day of the Jewish calendar, and Moses, he got sick in treating God. Why, oh God? Why will you wax so angry at your people? But after God refuses to forgive them amidst this entreaty, he lays down a challenge that is so brazen, that has so much effrontery. The mind is startled that this could have been left in the Torah. He suddenly says to God, and if you forgive them now, then okay, we can continue in our relationship. But if not, mecheni no misifracha asher kasavta. I demand that my name be taken out of the Torah. My relationship with Judaism, with you, is severed forever. If you are a God that kills and murders, then we cannot have a relationship. To wrestle with God. To point a finger at God in the face of seeming divine miscarriages of justice. That is the Jewish way. Christianity, according to Soren Kierkegaard, is about a leap of faith. Submission. Islam literally means to submit. A Muslim is one who submits. But the Jew, Yisrael, is he who wrestles with God. We never submit. We are a messianic people awaiting a messianic destiny. We will fight disease. We will clothe the naked. We will feed the hungry. Even when it seems that God wants them to remain hungry, we will not go along with that plan, because we actually take his law seriously. Even when he sometimes shows that he doesn't take it as seriously, seemingly. When he says to us, choose life, we choose life. We will not choose death. On my